Donc, bienvenue à cette seconde journée d'études consacrée au Vidéo Art Festival Locarno et plus généralement à des questions relatives au support de la vidéo et aux enjeux qui sont afférents à ce dit support. Donc, on va peut-être très brièvement rappeler l'objet qui nous réunit ici avant de passer la parole aux différentes conférencières. Donc, ce projet de recherche, enfin, ce séminaire s'inscrit dans le cadre d'un projet de recherche qui est soutenu financièrement par le Fonds national de la recherche scientifique et que l'on conduit depuis l'École cantonale d'art de Lausanne. Alors, le symposium lui-même se fait avec l'amitié et la collaboration de Marco Maria Gazzano et de l'Université Rematré. Et ce qui nous réunit ici, évidemment, c'est d'abord un cas spécifique, qui est le Video Art Festival, donc un festival qui est actif des années 1980 à 2001, et tout ce que ce festival impliquait comme activité, c'est-à-dire que c'était une plateforme de recherche, un lieu discursif, un lieu d'échange théorique, vu qu'il y avait toute une série de colloques qui avaient lieu au Monte Verita, donc évidemment ça renvoie à toute cette utopie avant-gardiste qui est liée oui, aux années 10-20. Et enfin, évidemment, il y a tout un pan aussi qui était lié au festival afférent à la production, à la production de projets, à la production d'éditions, à la production de films et de vidéos. Donc voilà, c'est un peu le sujet qui nous réunit. Hier, nous avions avant tout donné la parole à des témoins, des acteurs, des protagonistes du Vidéo Art Festival. Et aujourd'hui, l'enjeu est peut-être d'élargir le champ et de poser des questions plus générales à partir de ce cas spécifique. Donc, il y a un effet de champ contre champ pour utiliser un lexique cinématographique. Donc, cette fois, on se situe plutôt du côté du champ large ou du champ élargi. Alors, je précise aussi que voilà, ce symposium intervient en fin de projet. Donc, ça permet de faire le point sur les études qui ont été menées dans ce contexte. Et on avait auparavant, d'ailleurs, on remercie chaleureusement l'Élisarion, on avait auparavant organisé une exposition à Minusio qui confrontait des pièces canoniques d'art vidéo à une fresque homo-érotique de Van Kupfer, qui était le cofondateur du lieu de l'Élisarion. Et il y aura toute une série de publications qui seront, enfin toute une série, n'exagérons pas, 2 publications qui seront liées à ce projet de recherche, donc une histoire un peu factuelle, mais critique et théorique aussi, du Vidéo Art Festival. Évidemment, on a toujours du retard, ça apparaîtra plutôt l'année prochaine, si l'on veut être réaliste. Et d'autre part, on va publier des textes qui sont liés aux cours que René Berger donnait entre 69 et 80 à l'Université de Lausanne. C'est des cours expérimentaux qu'il avait intitulés Esthétique et mass média. Et on a sélectionné au sein de ces cours toutes les interventions qui avaient trait à l'art vidéo, avec des artistes suisses, romands comme Jean Hott ou Gérald Minkoff. Donc voilà, l'idée donc aujourd'hui de s'interroger peut-être plus largement sur qu'est-ce que ce support, la vidéo, qu'est-ce que ce milieu, le festival, quelles sont leurs interactions, comment peut-on dessiner cet interlieu, si on reprend un terme qui avait été proposé par René Berger. On pourrait dire que ce milieu s'apparente peut-être au terrain vague plus qu'à un espace quadrillé ou un jardin anglais. Voilà. Donc, j'arrête de présenter toutes ces choses. Je passe la parole à Edina qui va vous expliquer, à Edina May qui travaille sur ce projet, qui va vous expliquer un peu quel est le protocole à suivre en termes techniques, vu que nous sommes médiés par la technique.
François, and I'll switch to English because all the talks this morning will be held in English, and I'll keep it brief, being mindful of time. So just I'm reminding some housekeeping issues again, especially for the audience who's joining us right now. We'll ask everyone to stay on mute. Only the speaker should have their microphone active. And it's possible to ask questions by either writing them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, or you can also virtually raise your hand. And what we'll do is try and answer live the questions if there are any. And I'll introduce our first speaker this morning, Hanna Ho, and we're really looking forward to her presentation, because which is not directly related to the history of the Video Art Festival, but we're hoping that it's going to branch out into related topics of restoration, preservation, archiving of video and media art. Francois mentioned an exhibition we curated 2 years ago at the Alizarion in Minusio, just next to Locarno, and of course with its long history, the Video Art Festival has also gathered, collected, produced its own archive, and of course, although we're talking about Signal, this archive is actually very much a material one, with tapes, CD-ROMs, a lot of various media technologies which have become obsolete. So I guess Hanna will talk about how we engage with these, new technologies of the time, which have become old. But Hanna, who's Dr. Hanna B Ho, is a lecturer in the Department of History of Art at UCL, University College in London, where she co-convenes the BA program in the History of Art, Materials and Technology. She's also a research professor at Bern University in Switzerland, HKB. Her teaching and advising address subjects in art history, media and material culture studies, conservation, and American and European art since the 1960s. Hanna's publications include 6 books. Her writings appeared in peer-reviewed journals, edited volumes, and catalogs. She serves as an advisor on international research projects and academic programs, and acts as a reviewer for funding bodies, scholarly journals, and book series. And yeah, I mean, her writing on the conservation, restoration of works of Nam June Paik will be, I think, totally relevant for the present context. And I guess you'll try and weave from that work and I guess articulate things that will speak more directly to the reason why we gathered here over these two days on Zoom. So without further ado, I'll open the floor to Hanna Ho. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Adina, for this wonderful introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me. I am really thrilled to be speaking among such prominent and really accomplished speakers. I learned so much from the first day already that it needs time to process, I think. I hope that my topic of conservation, or more philosophical issues related to conservation, will be useful. As Adina mentioned, it reverberates on many different levels, I think, and in many different dimensions with what have been said already. And I think without any further ado, I would just let my slides, share my screen first of all, and begin my presentation. Share desktop, optimize, okay. So. Do you see my slides?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, without my notes, is it correct? Just because I have two screens.
Yeah, it looks all good.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you again for inviting me. Today, I would like to offer you a very brief glimpse at the world of conservation of video and media installations. And I was asked by Adina to focus on Namjoon Paik for his pioneering role in the use of video and television technologies, and because his media stand for a larger body of technological works that has been collected by museums and that exposes us to questions of obsolescence, not only of the playback and display devices, but also of the careers of the images. Namjoon Paik's legacy, as you all know, in the history of 20th century, rests on his introduction of the television and video as artistic media in the 1960s. Paik was born in Korea in the 1932, but he fled Korea with his father at the beginning of the Korean War, moving first to Hong Kong and later to Japan. After finishing his studies in music, art history, and aesthetics at the University of Tokyo, Paik moved to Germany in 1956 and continued to study composition and Western music at the Universities of Music and Freiburg. In the late 1950s, he traveled to Cologne to pursue his interest in electronic music and to Darmstadt for new music. In 1957, he met Karl-Heinz Stockhausen and a year later, John Cage, perhaps the most significant encounters of Paik's artistic career and connections that were essential for the relationship between media art and music. In 1964, he moved to New York, where he remained for more than 40 years. Paik ranged more widely than most other media artists in his selection of materials, his readiness to implement new technologies, and the interdisciplinarity of his activities. His oeuvre encompasses global communication systems and combines elements of obsolescence and chance with the most sophisticated technological solutions of his time. But his works also pose challenges at the place where curation and conservation intersect, and the lessons we learn from those works apply to media works in both private and public collections. As a representative of the so-called proto-new media, Paik raises universal questions about hybrid works, questions of presentation, maintenance, and conservation of media art. And you may already know that at the time of the symposium, many decades after these works were created, only a few works by Paik remained in their original form and condition, and almost none of Paik's works that still function are displayed with their original playback equipment. Technology-based media are subject to rapid cycles of obsolescence, and their relation or reinstallations, often employ components in updated formats and involve the emulation and migration of data and careers, challenges common to all media installations. In addition, given the phases of pre-production, production, and later maintenance of these works and the interdisciplinary networks of collaborators, fabricators, and mentors involved in them, Paik's art is bound up in social relations, exemplifying how people can engage with material culture and how artifacts mediate social relationships. Among Paik's greatest innovations and among the greatest challenges to traditional collecting, conservation, and presentation, and perhaps also archiving, was his rejection of the singular authentic object, in support of which he habitually released work in numerous versions, variations, and clones. In addition, Paik's open-ended creative process allowed for modifications and interventions long after his artworks began their life as a part of collections. Paik's art illustrates both how new technologies, because they are transitory, challenge the common understanding of an artwork as a physical object, and how an artist might relinquish uniqueness and singularity in favor of producing many versions of a multitude of objects. At stake in the conservation and preservation of such works is the acknowledgement of the process of change and the preservation of the interesting fluidity of artwork. And it might sound simple, but it's more complicated than that. So in my talk, rather than presenting you with the technicalities of conservation of video art, I will address several conceptual aspects that emerge from the particular materiality of Pike's media and how this materiality forces us to rethink what conservation is and what it does. I will present you with several examples of Pike's works, which are only in part related to VAF, to the Video Art Festival Locarno. For instance, Global Groove, a video constituent of TV Garden, might be seen as a precursor of Good Morning, Mr. Orwell from 1984. It was mentioned yesterday already, a piece present also in the festival catalog and something that Pike, I think, put on view during one of the venues of Locarno, Video Art Festival Locarno. And very quickly, why contingency of care? Contingency here means a future event or circumstance which is possible but cannot be predicated with certainty. It can just as well be otherwise. And I hope it will become clear as I start talking you through my examples. And this is the first of them here. And this is a piece basically that is in MoMA collection, which I am sure Barbara will know very well. We also discussed quite a lot during my time in New York and research for the book, which I will show you later. And I owe her a great deal of knowledge. And also to Glenn Wharton, I owe much of the knowledge that he was at that time a conservator of time-based media at MoMA. So this is here Namjoon Pike's untitled piano piece that was created in 1993. It is a closed circuit multimedia installation with sound, now in the MoMA collection, as I mentioned. It consists of an upright piano, 15 television sets, 2 cameras, 2 laserdisc players, a floppy drive, and an electric light. In Untitled, the upright piano is presented with an opened lid lit by an electric light. On the top of the piano, a compact bank of traditional cathode ray tube monitors, you can see here, transmits moving images, and on both sides of the keyboard and on the floor sit 4 smaller television sets. A cascade of black cables very beautifully falls from the monitors on the floor and on the sides of the piano. They connect the televisions with their playback devices, laserdisc players placed on the floor symmetrically to the left and right of the piano. The piano plays generic music, show tunes. Some of the monitors show images of John Cage, accompanied by Pike's hands playing the piano, and pictures of Cage partner, the dancer Merce Cunningham. The other monitors show 2 videos, one a live video feed of the piano playing itself from the floppy disk, and the other a real-time video of the piano hammer striking its strings. And I will very quickly switch now to QuickTime Player to show you basically, yes, to show you the work. I have to end the show to do this and move the video piano here. Do you see it? I can't see you, but I hope you do. I played very quickly. Okay, now I switch to my presentation again. Do you see my presentation? I would appreciate a very short yes, because I can't see anyone. Okay, super, excellent. So the playback and display apparatuses are essential to video installations, not only in their compositional role, but also in their ever-shifting balance between their sculptural presence and technical function. And there is the problem here. What should be done if the equipment succumbs to wear and tear and technical obsolescence? The obsolescence of U-Music and Laserdisc players parallels the obsolescence of TV sets and raises questions. Are these audiovisual devices important primarily as the carriers of image and sound, or is their chief significance sculptural? What do we look at and what do we see? And I must say, I probably disagree slightly with the view that that the most important part of an artwork is an artistic idea, and the support or the sculptural manifestation is kind of, or devices are secondary. And I think I will demonstrate it in this presentation. You might see here an archival image that reveals two U-matic players in place of the two laser decks that we just saw. Pike authorized the replacement of the earlier U-matic players with newer Laserdisc equipment at the time MoMA acquired Untitled Piano in 1993. Now the time has come to find a newer technology to replace the Laserdisc players and floppy disk from which the piano plays the show tunes. But rather than replacing the floppy disk entirely, MoMA decided to add a new device, the IQ Intelligent Player, which would take over the function of the floppy disk and placed it next to the old floppy disk player. Thus, the old apparatus, with its documentary value retained, would be retained, making the generational replaceability of playback equipment a moot issue and avoiding the consequences of removing the older elements. While the change here is discreet and concealed, not every visitor is ready to get on his or her knees the change of the devices playing back the moving image. The video decks to Laserdisc decks, as you saw before, were sanctioned by Pike, the move from the video decks to Laserdisc. So the change of the devices playing back the moving image is more striking because these devices are on view. And recently, MoMA chose to maintain the appearance of Untitled, with the old obsolete equipment on either side of the piano and the new playback device, DVD or computer hard drive, concealed from the viewer. This solution renders the deactivated apparatus a relic and poses questions about how such change may be made explicit to the viewer. Does it matter that what we are watching are dead media? Does the work sonic experience need to coincide with its visuality? The work might be an instance of where the culture of preservation of originals, that is, physical artifacts, takes precedence over the functionality of the work. In this instance, the relic was deactivated, yet retained for its aesthetic, sculptural value, and as a record of historical instrumentation, a term that coincides with Pike's musical education, which in my view affected his expanded understanding of the changeability of his work. And you may remember that I gave you quite an overview of his kind of artistic becoming in terms of, or contextualized against his interest in music, which I think played quite a role in the way how he approached his media. Here is a very brief glimpse under the piano piece. You see here the intelligent player. This is my colleague, actually Glenn Wharton, who is taking photos for the documentation of the piece, and this is just another kind of shot of the situation that might be seen. You see here, these are keyboards, basically the keys from the piano that might be seen by the viewer from the outside. So there's quite a lot of going on under the piano that is concealed. Part in effect of conservation, the piano collects traces of generational shifts in technology and mirrors the cultural economic context of the times in which it is displayed. What is also interesting in the context of shifting technologies is that MoMA transferred the video data of the piano from Laserdisc to the digibeta CAM format for archival purposes and to uncompressed QuickTime files for its exhibition. And I will not bore you with the technicalities here, but I think it is important to realize how the life of those works basically changes, and it is not quite obvious when you look at the work what happens in its inner structure, so to say, in its very materiality. So in searching for the best and earliest version of the tape, MoMA strove, and with the support obviously of Pike's estate, to retrieve the earliest available U-matic 3/4-inch tape. The multitude of data formats and forms of playback apparatuses inherited by the work is further expanded by an additional digibeta file that surfaced somewhere in the history of the work. That is perhaps irrelevant here, but it is out there and it is in the archive. So accumulating traces of its history, the work then is not a static assemblage of sculptural and electronic elements and data, but an ever-growing archive where past, present, and future coincide. The piano, untitled, discloses the heterogeneity of its temporal strata, a feature inherent also to the traditional works, such as lined and relined paintings, repainted canvases, and polychrome sculptures. You may imagine that when sculptures or paintings are painted in several layers, if we don't judge them by their surface, face value, it's a word pun, but by the stratigraphic depths of their formations, they reveal similarly kind of interesting temporal strata. So not only multimedia installations, but traditional works as well. Here you might see 5 different videotape formats used in electronics, used in electronic news gatherings in the 1990s, for instance. Top left is the U-matic video cassette. This is the first slide I'm referring here to here. Top left is the U-matic cassette, top right is the Betacam cassette, bottom left is an SVHS cassette, and bottom right is an M2 cassette. In the center, this tiny one, it's an Hi8 cassette, just to show you the materiality of the work, basically, that is quite often not on view, but that impacts how the work is and how the image or the visual, the aesthetics is shaped. And this is Laserdisc player, and Laserdisc obviously that was also part of the work. So we might thus argue that the deep material encounters with video works necessitate a detachment from the exclusivity of the visual perspective. Now, this is quite often, perhaps in visual studies less, but in art history, one looks at works, from the point of view of visuality more than materiality, although I do here injustice to many colleagues that are very profound in looking in depth, into works, kind of material life. But nonetheless, these exceptions kind of confirm the rule that the visuality is quite often the sort of prevalent perspective, the moving image, or the sculptural moving image, kind of heterogeneous form of installation. Deep material encounters with video works necessitate a detachment from the exclusivity of such visual perspective, I argue. Looking does not always involve seeing, and the looking at of purely visual study has to give way to looking through. Moreover, as we have seen on the example of piano piece, those works refuse to be contained in a single instance that often informs formal and historical interpretations. The instantiations of Pike's piano piece unfold the institutional biography of the work, and more broadly, they form the work's larger cultural biography, including editions and instances existent outside one collecting institution. And I will show you very quickly Albert Knox gallery variant and a Korean variant, which you might see here, which is entirely, you see, differently solved, a very different type of monitors, different arrangement, and unproportionally kind of arranged playback devices on this side. And this is something I found online on korea.net, another piano piece that was probably that is probably present in Korean collections. So what I'm trying to do here, you might have already noticed, is that this looking through the work means looking into its materiality, but also on the many instances of the work, on this kind of unfolding history, on this universe of a work. So what have we learned from the story of piano piece? That conservation is always linked with curation, I think. So in the straightforward sense, on display, the work materializes and enters cultural memory. No? While every act of display conserves aspect of the work, however, not every conservation aims at putting a work on display. This is something we have to realize. And secondly, curation and conservation are acts of negotiation between what we know about the work and what the work wants as active meta. This history of the work and the materializations of Pike's concept evidences that this work, and really any work of art, is an effect of an ongoing identity formation, contingent on the conditions of care and dissemination, in which we all have a stake, both as practitioners as theorists. And I think, you know, if many of you know it obviously from their practice, if you put a work on display in this and not different form, it kind of gets it enters cultural memory. It kind of gets codified, or even even canonized as such, especially with artworks or with artists of such a great caliber. So we need to adopt an alternative understanding of a work, I think. Too often, according to the traditional paradigms of conservation, but also, you know, the paradigms of museological practice, and the ideals that underpin art collections, we approach works like piano piece as fait accompli, or as inactive objects and relics of the past, which require care. Instead, we need to understand them as living, as always already new, in present that preserves the past and anticipates the future. So in my thinking, the concept of the archive allows us to reconfigure the status quo. It is in its virtual, so to say, and physical realm, the archive contains the work's previous and present conditions and allows for the future conditions of the work to materialize. So you may already see here that I'm thinking about the archive both as physical space and a conceptual kind of realm on the basis of which, you know, a work can materialize. I mentioned that curation and conservation are acts of negotiation between what we know about the work. Every act of display or exhibition prompts decisions concerning the work's physical appearance and explicates, as it were, the understanding of the work by all individuals involved. It is an act when knowledge, always situated and always perspectival, personal attitudes and education, and not to forget affects, of course, fold into a manifestation of a work. Conservation, as seen through the lens of recent media conservation, is no more an activity of mending and repair. It is no more this kind of restoration that still, you know, exists as an activity that is purely practical. Rather, it is a knowledge-generating activity and a practice with epistemic consequences. It combines different cultures of care, artisanal, creative, scientific, technical, and others, and reveals how decision-making is always partial and fragmentary, dependent on various agents of care and the circumstances of time and place. I'm gonna go very quickly into the concept of change, because unchangeability, this is very important, I think, to these works. Unlike traditional painting and sculpture, which endure in their materiality and form over long duration, video works and installations are best characterized by the changeability, that is, a continuous fluctuation of the elements and the relationships of these elements and viewer over time. They posed also most interesting questions of what the work is, when does it stay the same, and when it becomes different. I will probably not go into the theories of identity here, but you can imagine there is quite a lot to say about the philosophy of identity when a work becomes something different. How can we conceive of a work as staying still the same? But changeability is an artwork's potential to transform from one condition, I argue, appearance or constitution to another. Although change in traditional paintings and sculpture is a matter of damage or loss, many multimedia installations, such as I've shown you, invite change as a positive value each time they are reinstalled in different galleries and museums. They heterogeneous multimedia constituted and often the vantage point of the viewers, and thus their participation and involvement altered. Change is fundamental to the identity of these works. Changes can be intrinsic and extrinsic. The intrinsic change is when a work is conceived as an open design to be different each time it is materialized or performed, like for instance, Cage's 433. Or in which no performance sounds like another. Like Pike's plant ensembles in TV Garden, which I will show you just in a bit, or extrinsic change can be when curators or conservators intervene to repair a damaged work, replace obsolescent technology, like in Pike's piano piece. The actors involved in the different life stages of the work, curators, conservators, artist assistants, technicians, and all sorts of other agents can take part in both categories of change, allowing intrinsic change or limiting its extent to maintain the work's identity. And here is the example I promised to show you, TV Garden. My next example, here on view in Bremen between 1999 and 2000. TV Garden is really a very interesting example of Pike's works, also not only for the reason that it involves a global groove, but it's a very popular instance of electronic media, a playful symbiosis, as you see here, of techno-ecological garden. The core element, the global groove, begins with the following announcement. This is a glimpse of a video landscape of tomorrow, I'm quoting here, when you will be able to switch on any TV station on Earth and TV guides will be as fat as the Manhattan telephone book, end of quote. Pike's statement was visionary in the video's compositional principle and message. He anticipated the development of global channel surfing. In the light of the technological development of the past 50 years, this video encapsulates a fascinating picture of the 1970s. According to the media theorist Wolfgang Ernst, viewers are dealing here, and I'm quoting him, with the past as a form of delayed presence preserved in technological memory. And I will show you just very quickly a few instances of the work, and these are images taken from my book, Pike's Virtual Archive. So you may notice that that the figure captions here are just from the book. They don't follow any numbers in my presentation. This is Peter Moore image of the installation TVC Electronic Art at the Gallery Bonino in 1974. You see that there are no plants, and yet this is the kind of, this is the kind of precursor of TV Garden, often regarded as such. Pike did not have the financial means at that time to fulfill this installation in this kind of techno-ecological form, as many argue, and as I argue in my book. Here, a few more instances of TV Garden one that is presented here from the Museum Moderne Kunststiftung Ludwig Wien. Here is a TV garden from 2000. This is the installation in the Guggenheim Museum in New York, an installation which differs very extensively from any others. You might see that the garden is kind of dropped around the rotunda, and the viewer can walk through it and experience it, as well as the very particular architectural setting. Originally, the work was basically conceived, as you might see, perhaps partially here, from Kunstsammlung NRW and in Düsseldorf, an image as a garden that you can glimpse at from above, from a platform. And it was quite often installed in a more confined gallery, in a gallery that was enclosed from all sides, and the viewer could either enter it on a platform from one or two sides. This was the apparently, and according to Wolf Herzogenrath, whom I interviewed for my book, this was the kind of initial formation of the installation. And then the installation took off in many different forms and variations. This is a TV garden installed here at Tate Liverpool in 2010-11. And this is a really nice instance of the work that I experienced in Namjoon Park Art Center, Yongin, close to Seoul in 2008, where the garden involves, you know, the plants that are basically still office plants. I will tell you a few more things about this, but they are really giant, and the monitors in a way disappear in this almost like jungle-like ensemble, very characteristic, I think, of this particular region or geographical zone. The flat screens are also present next to cathode ray tube monitors. And this is another view of this installation in dark, and another view. You can see that the viewer here might walk around the ensemble and see it from many different perspectives, and there are a few plants scattered also on the sides. This is Pike signing another TV garden. Can you imagine? This TV garden is very different from the one that I just shown you, and the most canonized one by Pike. This one here is a tiny TV garden that he conceived in the studio. Carl Solway, that was one of his great mentors in Cincinnati, and came to sign the work in a sort of authorial gesture. This is a more recent image from the website of the Stedelijk Museum, retrospective by Pike, of Pike, organized by SF MoMA and Tate, among many others. This is a traveling exhibition, another kind of ensemble, really distinct. So this work, I argue, is an effect, and perhaps, you know, most kind of radiant and most explicit demonstration of a long identity formation. Curatorial decisions regarding space struggle with the obsolescence of technology, but also with the accessibility of knowledge and the archive. Changeability, the notion that I mentioned before, is manifest here through the continuous fluctuation of the work's elements and the viewer, obviously, in relation to those elements and their relationships over time. This work becomes a product of a collaborative effort of many hands involved. In my depth study of Pike's video installations, I encountered numerous fabricators, collaborators, and technicians that were instrumental in the realization of Pike's works. Very important, I think, here is also to account for them in our storytelling about the work, in how we, in a way, convey the work to the future generations as well. That you know, Pike's works were effects of collaborative efforts, and many curators, technicians, fabricators, and so on were involved. The changeability of the work is dictated by the presence of an instruction, which implies musical connotation, something that is very important here. According to Steven Vitiello, one of the Pike's assistants, who tried to pin down how Pike wanted the garden to be constructed, the artist, for instance, in one of the earlier stages, encourage the Brazilian curators to get their own plants, their own fish, their own Brazilian Buddha for a realization of this work. That was a quote from Pike. This is a form of a score on an orally transmitted instruction, in my view. And many of Pike's scores are preserved, for instance, at the Smithsonian in DC, and I was able to pursue research on those instructions and score with the support of Terra Foundation just this last academic year. And the richness of the archive is just amazing there. So again, as I argued, it is Pike's musical background that dictates the character of his works. He wrote his thesis at the University of Tokyo on Schönberg, that you already know, and he was the inventor of the 12-tone scale, as everybody is aware. He studied with Fördner in Freiburg, and then later, with Stockhausen at the electronic studio of the West German radio station in Cologne. And many people such as Mauricio Kagel and Georgi Ligeti came through the studio. And his very early work, Exposition of Music, Electronic Television, which was displayed in Wuppertal in the early 1960s, I think is an effect of his kind of trying to find a way between his musical background and his musical education and the visual arts and electronic media and video that is very characteristic of his later period. And I also mentioned Cage, who had an immense impact on Pike and who was an avant-garde composer and who had left such a great impact on the works of Pike. Perhaps then we can speak about instrumentation of this work rather than about using certain technological devices. Just as in an opera or in a symphony, an instrumentation of a piece implies that we can perform a certain interpretation, but not necessarily using the original or some kind of physical original equipment that comes from the past. This is something that has been very much contested and discussed in the conservation of contemporary art and in its theory. And I'm happy to talk to you more about, if you would like, in the discussion or on another occasion. We can also talk here about the higher and lower intentions in making decision about whether or not to use this certain, for instance, instrumentation, the cathode ray tube monitors that are cubical, that have a certain form and certain sculptural aspect. And I will not go deeper into this, but the higher intention, if we follow the higher intention, we would have to think about the artist's use of this media as something at the time new and very innovative. And if we follow the low intention, we can just proceed with the equipment that he used at the time. So say a cathode ray tube monitor will be preserved or will be always incorporated in this installation if we follow the sort of low intentions. The high intentions would imply new technology or a technology which is just as surprising and innovatory to our times. Also a notion that I think is quite promising, but also contested. Another example, a very nice example of what Edith Decker calls minimal video is a video work Zen for TV from 1963. It precedes obviously the former one and marked the times of the Video Art Festival in Locarno, but I really like this example because it shows what video art or video installation might be. And it is obviously so many things, so heterogeneous, so complex. So this is the work and its first appearance in the exposition of music, electronic television in Wuppertal in March 1963. Zen for TV is here, Rembrandt's Automatic, another work is here, and I will probably, yes, I can just tell you a few words about this. this was shown, the work was shown in the form it took as a result of the creative response of Pike to an accident. So 2 television monitors intended for the exhibition were damaged in transit from Pike's retreat in Bensberg-Refrath, which is a city next to Wuppertal, between this city and the city of Wuppertal. So the damage caused actually a sort of, a creation of a work. In Zen4 TV, you see here basically Zen4 TV from behind, and I will stay on this image for a few whiles. And here's C.T. Louis from his studio in New York, one of the experts that many museums consult in the conservation of Pike's works and other media. But I will explain you very briefly the logic of Zen4 TV, because the vertical deflection, an electronic component and a part of the electron assembly gun in a cathode ray tube monitor that deflects the beam of electrons and allows us to see a full image, had ceased to function, the monitor displayed nothing more than a horizontal line. You can still see it here, in the monitor that is not tilted. So Pike, after assessing the broken monitor, turned it on its side, making the line vertical, introducing in the process the reduction and stillness characteristic of Zen aesthetics. Pike recomposed what had signified the failure of the monitor to function and gave it a new meaning. He created a new life for the work based on a chance incident, an exceptional chance operation in Keijian terms that paralleled the one in the Champs large glass, in which the artist, as you know so well, accepted the shattered glass as a part of the work. Pike's acceptance of chance brought Zen4 TV into existence. It was not preconceived in any conventional sense. Instead, the work was conceived when the artist adapted the situation that presented itself. Pike's creative process here was contingent, and only after the fact was it affirmed as a conscious, purposeful act. Unlike traditional techniques in art that are based on skill and knowledge of fabrication and proceed in steps from genesis to an end result, Pike's technique in Zen4 TV was retroactive. He determined what the work would become by sizing the opportunity offered by a chance event and revised it as a decision that affected the status of contingency. Thus, Pike's creative act did not remain purely determined by a chance event, but became a conscious decision because the artist designated the TV set as a work of art. We might also talk here about the way how some of these decisions were controlled in his type of creativity, right? So for instance, rotating the monitor to 90 degrees, this was a controlled decision, but others were beyond his control, such as the chance incident that produced the line on the screen in the first place. Zen4 TV has undergone a number of physical changes since it was first exhibited in 1963. In fact, it has been exhibited using so many different televisions and TV cabinets and monitors that its many iterations could almost serve as a survey of the aesthetics of cathode ray tube technology from the 1960s to the present. You might see here on the screen. In addition to the obvious shifts in the work's sculptural form that you see here, changes have occurred on screen. The lack of vertical deflection means that the on-screen image is actually a full TV picture, right? Compressed into a thin line of light. If this is an image, what does it show, right? Or more to the point, what does it conceal? And from a contemporary perspective, what did it cease to show? Like a number of other manipulated devices in Pike's groundbreaking 1963 exhibition that I just shown you, Zen4 TV originally transmitted an analog German TV broadcast. So that broadcast continued to be present on screen in the compressed line. In other words, the TV was not really broken. There was still a picture present on screen. Even if it had collapsed, no? And even if the mechanical manipulation causing the compression in TV, in Zenfone TV, was not visible to the viewer. And there is a trick, in fact, you can check it out during your next exhibition visit. If you shake your hand very quickly from left to right, or from right to left, you can still, in a way, unfold this deflected image. You can still see what the image contains. So, although to imitate a vertical line on a TV screen might at first seem a simple matter, no, an exact, say, temporal translation of the artwork is impossible. This is so, first, because to transmit an image in the collapsed line using a present-day digital TV and broadcast technology would render the work a thing of the second decade of the 21st century, no, rather than the one of the 1963. And second, because using a current plasma, for instance, or LCD screen would deprive the work of its internal logic of manipulated circuits. Even though it is possible to transpose, so to say, the image of the line to other display technologies, those would never be able to emulate the mechanical specificity of cathode ray tube monitor, of CRT. Nonetheless, if the idea of a compressed image is still essential to the work, it is hard to say how many of the versions of Zenfone TV created since the 1963 have displayed a TV broadcast which would necessarily have changed over time and with geographical location, rendering the work something different. Or is it possible that they displayed white noise, which could have been noticed but only by a few? Here you can see the instructions Pike created retrospectively for the iteration of Zenfone TV, now in the Silverman collection at MoMA, that do not disclose the details about a TV channel that must be displayed and thus omitted from the viewer's potential experience. This is also perhaps something interesting, but I will not venture into it in the detail, that the Zenfone TV that MoMA has in their collection entails a signed TV casing. So it renders the work in a way, again, autographic, something irreplaceable and something that cannot be kind of restituted by a different technology. Just like Zenfone TV, I will very quickly show you this work, but really for just a minute. Zenfone TV, here's the moon. Moon is the oldest TV. My last example is a work based on a manipulation of inner circuits. The moon is the oldest TV. Different phases of an electronic moon were generated mechanically by moving the picture tube scanner to the back of the tube. This distortion produced an image of the moon that, with the magnets that were applied to the neck of the picture tube, created the image. Moon is the oldest TV employed the internal logic of the apparatus to create the image and was obtrusively yet closely dependent on specific display technology. The work evolved from concept realized on one monitor. Perhaps many of you saw this exhibition in 1964, Electronic Art at the Gallery Bonino. I know it from archival, obviously, documents. So the work was there realized as one monitor, then later as a multiple monitor installation, which developed in 1976. Later, Pike created a 12-monitor version, the number of monitors suggesting the 12 months of the year. In multiple later manifestations of the work, both the number of the monitors and their spatial arrangement continued to change. One of the more radical interpretations of Moon is the oldest TV was a 25-monitor compilation created for the German pavilion of the Venice Biennial in 1993. And I just blended it in here. You might see a very, not very sharp picture, but yet it gives you an idea. At that point, Pike decided to film the images of the lunar sphere generated on the TV tube with the assistance of Paul Garin. This decision had far-reaching implications because it resulted in an artwork that was visually close to the original in the images seen on the monitors, but operable on a playback system, right? So the significance of the playful manipulation of the cathode ray tubes was lost because the moons were played back rather than produced by manipulation, creating a sort of visual narrative that related the moons to a medium embedded in the technological possibilities of the time. So to conserve such work means to select a variant of it from a rich meshwork of offsprings, taking into account that this act is shaped by the time and place from which the decisions are made. It might just as well be otherwise. To conserve means also to realize the role conservation plays in a wider historical history of the work, not only of this particular work, however, right, but of the artistic project as a whole, and acknowledge this as a form of self-awareness, an actancy or an agency that constitutes the change. So very quickly, by way of conclusions, what are the lessons learned from this work, from the conservation or presentations of these works? Perhaps that the engagement with video and media installations from the point of view of conservation allows us to adapt a material consciousness or material literacy that takes into consideration various agents of care and knowledge about their actancy. That conservation, perhaps, is anything but neutral. It is not a neutral act, right? The activities meant to prolong an artwork's life into the future also affect its identity. Any attempt to perpetuate an artwork also irrevocably changes it. The same could be actually said about curation. That conservation is affected by its very objects, tools, and techniques, and is continuously adapting to the demands of contemporaneity, the reality of artworks, and the novelty of artistic genres. With varying results, conservation attempts to keep up with the intellectual, technological, and scientific developments and to assimilate institutional and non-institutional cultures. Untangling conservation past and present may teach us something about the conditions in which the events of conservation or preservation or presentation and any other interventions took place, and about the constituents of the conservation object. Because every act of perpetuation and conservation presupposes a certain understanding of the work and or implies also a certain perhaps experimental system, to use the terminology familiar to the historians of science. We may scrutinize here conservation and its components, conservation objects, techniques, methods, approaches, residues, and traces left behind as an auto-archaeological exercise, an archaeology of the recent or contemporary past, to detect the orders and the historical a priori, in Michael Foucault's terms, that have allowed certain actions to be performed while repressing others. And these are very quickly, two books that I would like to show you, Pike's Virtual Archive and Revision Zen for Film, that I devoted to my exploration of the materiality of Pike's media from the point of view of conservation, curation, and change, obviously. And if you are more interested, I'm happy to chat with you on in the Q&A or afterwards on another occasion. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Hanna. That was really wonderful, and yeah, we really all thank you for this rich, precise, and very sensitive presentation on all the many iterations of Pike's work. And I think that was a really strong case also for, you know, notions and ideas such as, you know, I'm not sure you mentioned that, but like, you know, writing the biography of object, new materialisms, and media archaeological approaches. I think there was a strong case for their relevance to write the history of video art and media art. We're running a little bit late, but we started a bit late as well. And I saw that someone raised their hand. So I think I'll bring them into the, I'll open their mic so they can ask their question. Okay, so Yolanda Ratti, yeah, you can open your mic and ask your question. Yolanda, you have to unmute. Okay.
Sorry, no, I did not raise my hand. It's a mistake. I just listened. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Okay,
no, I had no question. Sorry.
That's okay.